Hi, and welcome to Run Before You Walk podcast. I'm Matt.
I'm Steven.
And we're going to talk about what is it even we're doing here?
Yeah. And before we're done, we're going to show you 3 broad strategies that a church can use for online or hybrid ministry. You might have noticed that there is a ton of experimentation, and that will probably continue for a decade or so. But we've got 3 broad strategies we think you can consider when you're trying to think through what does your church even want to be doing on the internet as we move beyond COVID.
This last week, I was talking to a friend of mine, and she's a pastor, and she said that she couldn't wait for COVID and all of its protocols to be over because she couldn't wait to get back to what it was that she's good at, and that's not online ministry. And it pointed out to me that what I think I'm doing and what she thinks she's doing are 2 drastically different things, and that's where we have to be today.
Yeah, but she's not uncommon, right?
No, not at all. I hear it all the time.
Yeah, right. I hear it all the time. So I think we should begin by just thinking through a question that we also hear a lot, and it's online ministry is not real ministry, right? Yeah. An online church is not real church, right? Because it's not real, it's not in the real world, it's in a virtual world, right?
Yeah.
And we hear this sentiment all the time. I'm sure you have heard this sentiment at home. But I think it's short-sighted. Let me give you a few examples. My mother, her best friend, is a woman named Susan who lives in North Carolina. I don't believe my mom has ever been to North Carolina. I know she's never met Susan in person, but they've known each other for 20 years.
Wow.
They met in the late 90s in a chat room on the CompuServe thing, actually.
CompuServe, that's a throwback.
Yeah, and they're best friends. They are joined together because of their shared love of quilting and scripture. And my brother, to this day, calls this woman Aunt Susan, and they've never met in person.
Wow.
I met my wife on a dating site called Christian Mingle. And, that is the internet,
That
right?
is the internet.
It started in a virtual situation. It was quite real. And then, of course, now it's come into the non-internet world. But the truth is, half of my relationship with my wife is still on the internet. I mean, how much of your conversation with your wife is texting?
We'll be in the same house together, and we'll text through because our daughter's in the room. And we want to make sure that we say things that our daughter can't hear.
Right. And that's the internet. So I think it's important that we often say it's virtual, and then we feel like we forget all this stuff, because I didn't say anything you don't know. But we all of a sudden turn it into like some sci-fi movie in our head that is distinct from physical reality, but that's not really.
So is it like Bill and Ted's, or is it like Gattaca? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I'm thinking of Johnny Mnemonic.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, which is not a good movie.
Not a good movie. Not a good movie. Don't go watch it.
But it's not, that's not what it is. What the internet has done is sort of accelerated things that happened already. For example, imagine 50 years ago. All of us know that real relationships formed with people who never met in person, but the relationship formed over letter writing.
Yeah.
We call those pen pals.
Yeah.
And in fact, a lot of us know that sometimes those relationships got serious. In fact, C.S. Lewis married someone who wrote to him.
I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah, I had too, until we were working on this. So the internet is kind of just that. So it's important that we realize and we recognize that the internet it's still people, and they're just connecting. It's just that the communication medium has shifted a little bit.
Yeah.
So what I was hoping we could do as we accept that is think, okay, for my local church that is primarily committed to ministering to my local community, what are the potential strategy options for what our church can be doing online?
Yeah.
So I've got 3.
You got 3.
I got 3.
I'm excited. I got my popcorn out.
I got to check my iPad though, because I forgot what they were.
Let's see.
That's good. So the low-hanging fruit, and the one a lot of us see, is that it's an invitation to in-person. And you could run your online hybrid ministry where that's essentially all it is.
And that's actually what I said to my friend. I was like, no one will ever, from now on, step into your church without having first watched a YouTube of your worship service. That will never happen again.
It will never happen again.
Never happen again.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That is correct. And we all as church leaders need to accept that. It's not up for debate.
I don't think so.
not in the real world.
Maybe it's hyperbole. Maybe you do get the occasional Easter and Christmas visitors still.
Yeah.
Because it's ingrained, but there's going to come a time when that culture doesn't exist.
Yeah, and it's close.
It's close.
So that's one thing. So if your one strategy would be to only figure out what you have to do to support that. And that wouldn't be that hard. You could film part of your worship services. You could maybe do a great version of that where you stage some of it and pre-record some of it. You could do something like that, post a service once a month. Frankly, you could post one every 6 months. But however
You got to do
think
something though.
Yeah.
That's what I keep hearing is kind of like when you have a bad church website, it's still better than no church website.
Yes.
Mostly.
Yes.
Mostly.
Yeah, I guess I would technically agree with that.
You technically, look, I started a debate, but let's go forward.
Okay, so that's one strategy. And maybe your church says, you know what? That's all the online or hybrid ministry I'm interested in. Okay, but at least you know what your goal is and you can aim at it and figure out the details.
Yeah.
The second strategic goal you can have is to disciple the people who attend in person inconsistently.
Yeah.
Let me explain what I mean by
Yeah,
that.
I hear that word inconsistent.
Yeah. Now, you have probably noticed that some of your congregants do not come 4 Sundays out of the month.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, most actually at this point.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us noticed it initially with families with young kids because there were soccer games scheduled on Sundays now in most of our communities. And so these are families who still think of themselves as engaged and as part of the church, but they are unable to just be there every 4 Sundays.
Yeah.
So one strategic option is to say we want to support those families who are unable to be here at 10 a.m. on a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
And in that case, like there's a lot of ways you could approach that. Again, you could literally just film your service. I think that might not be the best thing, but maybe, and it would probably support those families. Or you could do something different. Maybe the pastor sits and does a 5-minute version of his or her sermon, and you stick a song with it, and there's like this 12-minute video that gets posted on your social media or your website like Monday morning, right? So you're not stealing the thunder from the sermon.
Just spam it out there in Instagram, all of it.
All that stuff.
You can do all of it all at one time.
And then all those families who weren't able to be there, they still are sort of connected to whatever the pastor's preaching on and still connected to the community. They could use it for daily devotionals and things like that. And so in this way, you will find you are more effectively discipling the families in your church. I heard someone say once, they said, as their church switched to completely online ministry because of COVID, they were surprised that all of a sudden people were watching all 4 sermons in their sermon series.
Yeah.
Whoa.
That's my experience too.
Really?
Yeah, my experience too,
Yeah,
definitely.
and they said, man, that hasn't happened since the 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the second strategy.
So the first strategy, let me remember.
Okay.
I'm getting into the zone here.
Okay.
The first one was to create an invitational strategy. It was a strategy for invitation of people to come to the physical location. The second one I heard was the strategy was to disciple people who are already here but can't be in person for whatever reason.
Exactly.
Okay, awesome.
And especially now, I assume for months there will be folks who choose to not meet in person because they're still concerned about COVID, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the third strategy is more ambitious, but not out of reach of most small churches or small and medium-sized churches. The third strategy is effectively to create a third worship service that is entirely on the internet.
Or a second in my case.
Or a second.
A second worship in my case.
Yeah, I don't know how I decided.
We're talking to small church pastors here.
Right.
We barely have one sometimes.
So you can do this, right? And it's essentially, like you could do it in a lot of different ways. You could adapt almost any of the strategies that many of our churches have seen during the time of COVID. You could have an online service or an online campus if you prefer that language. I kind of like some aspects of that language, but you could do that totally on Zoom, like we've seen some churches doing. You could do it with a pre-recorded and edited worship service in the online church
That's
platform.
my plan going forward. Is basically that.
Tell us, what is your plan?
So my plan is our worship service, when we go back in person, will be at 10 a.m.
Okay.
But we will have an online worship at 9 for an alternative community. And our leaders within the church will be tasked with being the host. Just like you have greeters at your back door, there will be hosts set for that online worship. And it is meant to be an alternative community that we recognize as this is evangelism, this is outreach. Okay. This is not who's currently in our church. We're creating space for people who are not ever going to step through the doors of our physical location.
Okay, so let's talk about that. So that's interesting. You said a bunch of stuff that I think is interesting.
Yeah.
So you said
I tend to do that.
your primary goal is outreach.
Yes, primary goal is outreach.
Okay. Let's talk about that, and then I want to ask you how you're technically going to pull this off with man hours and cameras.
Yeah.
So if that's your goal, I noticed that you're probably accomplishing some of the other goals at the same time with your approach.
I think that's true, because I think I think we'd all love to do all three, right? We would love to disciple our congregation. We'd love to have an invitational strategy, and we'd love to, whatever those third things were.
Yeah.
We'd love to do all the above. But what I think is true is that when you shoot for people who are not here yet, it also covers the people who can't make it today.
I think
and
so.
it also, because you are releasing it into the wild of the internet, it also makes space for people who are like, I'm going to check out that church before I go there.
Okay.
But no, I think if you start with that first goal is just like we're presenting and don't anticipate any interaction, you're not hitting either the second or the third goals probably. Yeah. But if your goal is discipleship, you're probably hitting the first one and the second one.
Yeah, I would think so.
So like when you shoot for intermittent discipleship with people who are a part of your congregation, you also create an invitational strategy. But this third one, when you shoot for a strategy of building a community, you also have the intermittent discipleship and the invitational strategy. You have it all. You get everything by shooting for that one thing. Now, you asked me, how am I going to do this with the limited human hours?
Right.
Human hours.
Let's talk about that.
So we're doing pre-recorded for that reason. And my plan is, I don't use a manuscript, so who knows, but when I go to practice my sermon from the outline or from my bullet points or whatever, I'm going to record that practice. And that will be ready to give to our, right now it's Stephen, but for whoever you are that edits the video together, that will go in there. There will be a scripture reading that I also do, but also our music director, when she does her practice, she'll also record her practice. And by doing that, we'll have the beginning, I'll have the welcome and greeting, we'll have the opening song by the music director, scripture reading by me, sermon by me, benediction by me. 20 minutes is all it's going to be. But and there's a strategy behind that.
Okay.
The strategy is, this is for people who would not step through the doors.
Yeah.
And I think it's essential that I go even less time than I'm currently doing.
Okay. That's interesting. I want to ask you a bunch of follow-up questions, but I feel like
that might be the next episode.
I think it might be the next episode. So folks, I would encourage you to consider your strategic goal and what you're trying to do online. If you I totally agree with what Pastor Matt said, that if you go for this third thing where you're trying to sort of set up an online community, you kind of get all the other stuff in the package. And so if you can pull that off, I think that's great. Keep your online worship even as you return to in-person.
Yeah, real talk though. Real talk.
Okay.
Yeah, real talk. This is hard. When I heard my friend, I sound like I'm being glib right now.
Yeah.
When I heard my friend, I promise, I heard that with compassion. Yeah, this has been hard. And a lot of us, we're just glad to leave it behind.
Yeah.
But I don't think we can leave the learning behind. And I want you to know it's hard, and you're not going to be good at everything. And maybe you can't do all the things that Stephen can do because he's really talented. But you can do something. And I think choose the thing that you can do and you feel comfortable with, and just keep doing that, at least that one thing that engages online. Maybe that's just social media posts.
Okay.
Keep online as an option within your world.
Yeah.
I think it's really important that because we are trying to leave the pain of this COVID protocol behind, we don't leave large swaths of population who could be touched by the grace of God behind.
Yeah. And I think the way to make those decisions is to figure out what your goals are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, that's our show for the day. I'm Matt.
I'm Stephen.
And we'll see you next time.